Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Candice King, and welcome back to Black 250 Conversations. We've all heard the saying that love makes the world go round, but my next guest for Black 250 Conversations shows us that love, paired with self determination, can do something far more powerful. In her Black 250 essay, Love and Self Determination Building and Sustaining Black Community Power at 250, Anoa Changa-Peck asks us to look at Black community not simply as a response to oppression, but as a sacred practice of caring for one another. Anoa Changa-Peck is a Southern-based whimsical multi-hyphenate honing the art of pattern recognition. Her work is largely inspired by the sacred covenant set forth by the late movement journalist and strategist Ida B. Wells Barnett and the prophetic wisdom found in Octavia Butler's Parable series. Anoa approaches coverage through a lens that centers on impacted communities and moving beyond the status quo. Anoa, welcome back, and thank you so much for being here with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It feels like such a lovely reunion, and just reading your piece, it was so powerful, and I'm just really excited to get into it. So starting us off, you open this essay talking about what comes up for you when you're thinking about Black community. And I was really struck by how you pulled out these two concepts of love and self-determination. So can you talk to us a little bit about, why you started there and what those concepts mean to you when you think about community?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And so when you and I first talked about kind of the frame for this, right? I appreciate that we kind of landed in a similar, like what was like kind of hopeful and uplifting because like the Black community is such a broad term and it means so many different things to so many different people depend upon what day, time, right, what area you're talking about. And there's so many different things that come up when you think about community. And so when I actually first started writing, I actually had this very long, like, I just started having this memory when I thought about community, when I thought about Black community. My mom, we grew up between New York and Chicago. We're originally from New York, but we also grew up in Chicago. So, like, my mom would say, in the 80s in Harlem, she would just say that, she could drop her kids off us anywhere on 125th Street. And by the time she came back, she knows we would have been like fed, we would have probably got a new book, like we would have been well taken care of, right? And so like that is like a sense of community, right? Or it would be like hanging out with my dad and his friends and all of us going over to like Central Park, or how my parents would like cook and a bunch of their friends would come over and everybody would like watch TV or whatever. Like that's an early sense of community, right? Or the last example I thought of was like literally like Kwanzaa celebrations. Mama Rashida, who, I mean, to us, she was an institution. There's so many different ideas I thought about, right? But I also thought about the fact that when we talk about Black community and like our lineages, like, we're Caribbean American on my dad's side, right? Like his family comes from Barbados and also Cabo Verde West Africa. So like that's a different community set in sense, right? For some folks, so I was thinking about like, okay, how do I talk about the full breadth of Black community and all that it has been? And I really stepped back and just thought about like what are some of the commonalities and through lines, right? And what we're thinking about when we talk about Black community. Also just thinking about how to keep it in a positive, because when we talk about Black community, also we all get grouped together also in response oftentimes to negative, things from the dominant, power structure. And so it really was like this love and care, in their ideals, because it's not perfect, right? But love and care, but then also that self-determination. And like self-determination is an individual feeling, but there is a collective. When I thought about like collectively how Black community has shown up over the generations, there has been that consistent through line of self-determination, right? And it is manifested in so many different ways. And then that love, like that is like just the care. It doesn't have to be like romantic love, or we think about chosen family. I mean, so many of us, we know with Black folks, like you might have your auntie and your cousin and your uncle and all them, and they're not technically related to you, but like it don't matter, like the fictive kin, right? So like we know that we build community and family dynamics in a certain way, and that has been a powerful grounding. And so that's where I was like, okay, this is, I think, what the common through line is for all of us, and this is where I'm going to land when we're talking about the Black community in 250 years of America.
Yeah, and I think that, throughout the piece, we really see those two, through lines coming through, especially when, you talk about the Montgomery bus boycott. You also talk about Bayou and Langston, Oklahoma, and the communities that you spotlight, which we'll get to in a second. But I kind of wanted to go back to your discussion of love. And of course, one cannot really talk about that without one of the most incredible polls from the Bell Hooks, her book All About Love, which you reference. And so, curious also if you can talk us through like how you're using her text to think about love and Black community.
Yeah, so like I wanted to find a way to kind of just give us a common frame of reference for what I was, what I'm trying to communicate and convey, right? Because I think as much as this is reflective, this is also prescriptive as we're looking forward to like how we show up and what we do. Because there is so much of us showing up in solidarity around crisis, around atrocities and stuff, right? But like there's so much joy and resilience and whimsy and so much else. So like Bell Hooks and All About Love seemed very like a natural segue in terms of thinking about like because she's someone that's actually very intimately thought about like how we relate to one another, whether it's in family dynamics, community, heteronormative, relationships, marriage, whatever, right? Like all these different things. And she's not the only one, but she's someone I thought of immediately. And so, like, she has a chapter in the book about community, right? And love. And so, really just thinking about how what we have built out of, shared trauma, right? Trauma bonding, and how we shift to something that is actually fulfilling and uplifting is through this process of love. That's also, it's like, yes, there's the self-love, but there is a level of self-love that then leads us into how we show up and we love and engage with each other. And so like I just really felt like that quote, that section really helped pull together more of like where I wanted to go in, like kind of the analysis as we're thinking about community. Because again, because we can go all of these things, it's, we're talking about, you could have a whole encyclopedia library, it's a decade long conversation probably if you did it every single day talking about individual communities and opportunities. So just pulling out a snapshot. But I wanted to bring in, yes, this is my thought and what I was thinking, but I also was like, this is where I've drawn inspiration from. And so how can I bring this in? And maybe it's also exposing people to something different from bell hooks that maybe they're familiar with.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I loved about how you were tying that in is you showed how from this love, we also get safety, right? And so one of the things I was also struck by is when you were talking about Mount Bayou and how that was a space of reprieve for mothers like Mamie Till, who was grieving the loss of her son, Emmett Till, and also just the horrors of Jim Crow. And so, can you also unpack for us, the communities that you selected, right? Mount Bayou and Langston, and how you were seeing love and safety manifested in these communities?
Yeah, I mean, like, because the other thing is, like, we talk about community as also physical space, right? Like the neighborhoods we grow up in, the communities. And so we know post Civil War, like throughout the Reconstruction era, and even post Reconstruction, we know that there were Black communities and towns that were physically created. And so part of picking Mound Bayou and Langston was more so just my own, like, I know I've heard of some places and I want to look beyond just the ones we already know, right? Like,
Yeah.
because there are certain Black communities and towns we already know, and folks may be more familiar with Mound Bayou a little bit now because of Sinners, but still, I feel like because there was stuff I was reading that I never knew about Mound Bayou, and it's like critical role in terms of the civil rights struggle, particularly for those based in Mississippi, as well as when we think about the evolution of like just modern like blues, the early R&B, etc. Right? Like, so it's just this really interesting intersection of culture and community and care all in one place. And so that seemed like a really good example. But the example I pulled out specifically about Mamie Till, and then the Black journalists and other folks who were like Mount Bayou was, I forget how many miles, maybe 10, maybe 30 miles away from where the trial, when the original trial happens for Emmett Till, Mamie Till and others, they stay in Mount Bayou. It is Mount Bayou that provides them shelter, but also protects them during this time, right? Like, because this is a very contentious moment. I mean, she literally had to sneak the photos out of his body, you know what I'm saying, back to Chicago. So Mount Bayou was a place where folks were able to find that refuge and community, like during that process. And so I found that to be really interesting. And like, I'm like, this is something I would love to like kind of dig more into, to kind of just see how this interplay worked, right? And not just there, but in other communities. So that was why I chose Mount Bayou, right? But also because like the lore of Mount Bayou. And I literally, when I was writing this, I was like, oh yeah, because I was like, wait a minute. The town they're trying to go to in Centers, where they're like, oh, that's where you need to go. That's a real place. But I also know from my godmother, she teaches a civil rights travel course in the summertime for students from Stetson University down in Florida. And Mount Bayou is one of the places they go. So I know of it from her talking about what they've done. And like, it's this all black town. It still exists. And so that was just like a beautiful thing to me. And so I was just like, yes, let's drop this footnote here. Because that's what it is, right? Like these are just like mere footnotes in our collective history. And, because we can even extend to the diaspora, right? But I'm
Yeah.
like, keep it here, but there, and then also Langston, thinking about Oklahoma, because we know Tulsa, but what other, like when like choosing Langston is one of, I'm blanking on the exact numbers, but like there was a whole mass movement to get black people to inhabit Oklahoma and to go west and settle west, right? There were folks based in like Chicago and other places, Midwest, that were actively recruiting black families to come move to Oklahoma. And Langston is one of the towns that is set up, that is established by free black people who are trying to expand and engage. And it was, I mean, really like, because I don't really think that we talk much about like black folks and homesteading, but our connection to land, right? Particularly when we think about the failed promise or the unfulfilled promise of 40 acres and a mule, and what the possibility was outside of the Jim Crow South, right? Like, sure, we had folks who went north, understandable, but people who were used to being on the land and doing the work, like to go out and the possibility to build something brand new was so fascinating to me, right? And even now, like, my family and I, we always figure like, okay, we want to, if people talk about wanting to buy land, want to do stuff, like where would we go? It seems like such an odd concept to me to even consider going out to the Dust Bowl, but what is there and what has been built has also been built by us, right? Like, so I thought the inclusion of Langston just was a great anecdote to include as well. Also, the fact that Langston is still an existing city in Oklahoma, right? And so, I know there are different people have done showcases and highlights of different black towns and communities, but I wanted to pull out like just a couple of examples that maybe folks knew but didn't know that much about. I know I didn't know that much about them, but from what they represented to me, at least on the surface of what I was trying to get at when we talk about like what is the physical form of community, as much as like this other interpersonal community that we build.
Yeah, and speaking of building, uh, from those two communities, we see that we get safety. We also see that Black people bring we build our own institutions, right? But also we build movements.
We
Because that's
do.
where you take us next
Yeah.
after your discussion of these two communities, talking about the Montgomery bus boycott. And so, wondering also if you can unpack for us, why community was essential to the success of that movement. Obviously, it seems like something so obvious, right? But I love the way that your essay sort of brings it to light for us.
When you think about, again, we think about this care, and again, that is a community that is literally a community of black people that decided to do a thing. And I have watched, if folks have not seen it, the rebellious, what is the rebellious life of Miss Rosa Parks, like her, the Peacock special about her. I've watched it multiple times. That one in the Loudons County Road to Black Power, right? I've watched both of those multiple times because watching that, and there's a whole book that comes from, but like there's a lot about Rosa Parks that we don't know. But there's also a lot about the bus boycott that we actually also don't know. And I appreciate this that documentary, because there's some elements that bring in kind of the full breadth of that, actually, like how things got started, how people were doing what they were doing, and what it actually transitioned to, right? And there's some excerpts of her talking about it in different places too. That's not what is commonly packaged to us. So thinking about the bus boycott and how it literally was community coming together and saying, we got us. It wasn't just like all altruistic and happy. I'm sure there were different agreements and arrangements made because, unfortunately, Jim Crow and capitalism are still things. But at the same time, we know we had community, right? Like they talk about like how, the kids knew when they came back home to spread the word to their parents, right? The parents knew, like, okay, so we had folks who had to make other arrangements. Like people talk about the boycotts, and the reason why I touched on the bus boycott too,
Yeah.
because we have all this talk now about boycotts and our economic power, and people use that as one of the examples. Yes, but it was the act of community and coming together. It wasn't any singular person or magical thing. It was all these different, things that came together. But it was like having like folks, almost exclusively everyone in the community is like, okay, we're not writing. And it originally was a one day thing, and then it continued. But it was the coming together and the convening, the making the collective decisions, people being willing to, like, okay, we'll be the taxis and we'll drive people and we'll set up the routes and stuff. But that's also an inconvenience, right? So that's also all of us willing to agree to be inconvenienced. So even if folks got compensated for that, I don't know this, I don't remember the specifics, but like that still is a collective inconvenience. If I got to figure out a route to drop folks off and maybe they're not on the same place, like those are all the things that are part of that community and care, because we are all on the same page about what the outcome is necessary. And I really feel like that level of discipline and that little level of focus is something that a lot of times we miss from modern movement spaces. And we talk a lot about being in community. Like people throw in like modern progressive or modern movements. We throw around like being in community and things like that. But like when we really get down to like what that means and what that looks like, and there's so many different examples, right? Like again, these are just like a few that people resonate with because we already know them. But like we have examples of people showing up and caring, because yes, that's something that happens in response to Jim Crow and response to white supremacy, but that is also the self-determination,
Yeah.
right? Like in play, where we have people actively stepping up and standing together to make something happen that they need for themselves. And you combine the actual community advocacy, and then also you have the legal strategy interplay, right? And those stewards who then also stand in the guard and in the gap, a part of the vanguard. That really, like when we're talking about our community, right? When we're talking about all our folks, we have so many different people who play different roles in this thing we talk about in terms of like liberation and freedom. And so like everyone has a role to play, and it's not always going to be the same thing. We're not always going to be showing up the same way. But I think what I'm trying to convey is just like those common values, those common spaces of connection, like that can help us move things forward, even if we don't, like, I don't gotta like you.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying? But I do care for your existence and well-being, right? Like I don't got to worry about whether or not we best friends or we kiki after church or whatever. Like we know we need to come together because this is the thing we need to move it. I think that's a great example of how people were able to do that. I mean, again, that's not the only example, but I think that's an example that people are aware of, that is resonant. So yeah.
Yeah, and I was gonna go somewhere else, but as you were talking, I was just thinking about, your connections to modern day and how right now we're seeing this like vested attack on, all of the progress that we've made, in those generations. And so community is actually going to be very essential to ensuring that we not only stand our ground, but we also protect the rights that our ancestors have earned, over the years. And so I'm just curious, what are some of the lessons from community that you have been seeing emerge, while you were writing this piece that maybe we can hinge on in this current moment?
Yeah, I mean, I really do think it is like we were talking about. I mean, I think even us being able to curate this series, right? Like, I think this is When we talk about folks like Ida B. Wells, and there's so many other people. I went to law school in West Virginia, so shout out to J.R. Clifford, who's the first Black attorney in West Virginia, and also a newspaper man. So we had so many folks in our history. I mean, people love to talk about Ella Baker. Ella Baker also was a writer and journalist, right? W.B. Du Bois founded the Crisis magazine for NAACP. So like, how we help tell the story of the work and like help bring these concepts into full view, or just like how we analyze and help people understand things, that has always been a part of the work as well. And so like what we have now is like this separation from, we have like, oh, those are the people, those are the advocates, and the other people over there, those are the journalists over there, those are these people over there. And so like our predecessors, they didn't do all that bifurcating, like they didn't do all that separation like that, right? Like they were very clear, like, this is who I am, this is what I stand on, and then yes, I'm writing this, but then yes, I'm also doing this because I'm a full person as I show up. And so I think like just some of the lessons that we learn is like, we know we can't turn. You and I don't stop being Black women, Black femmes. We don't stop just because we enter a different space or a different role. And so I think there's just that, like, showing up as our full selves and understanding what the mission, what the assignment is for the moment, right? Like I think there's a lot of that people are reclarifying for themselves, that particularly where things are right now in 2026, it's like, okay, I'm seeing this. And I think that's also part of the why I jokingly talk about the pattern recognition thing, is like, because I get like super, like, I like, behind me is this print I did from Ida B. Wells, but like it's a quote that she wrote in 1910 in a pamphlet about how enfranchisement can help stop lynching. And it's, with no sacredness of the ballot, there could be no sacredness of human life itself. And why I think there's so much lessons for us to pull from her and that era and other folks is because we don't have to recreate the project of white supremacy in this country. It evolves, it changes, it has different ways of doing what it does, but it's fundamentally the same exact thing since the inception of this country, right? I was having a conversation with someone the other day, this older civil rights litigator, and constitutional law litigator, voting rights litigator, and he was explaining to me about how, like, when you look at the early founders and the fight they had about who got to vote, whether it was, land owned property owners or not. And part of the justification of trying to prevent poor folks from voting was that they were afraid that other people with money would influence them and have an outsized influence, right? So it's this weird paternalistic, like, weird thing, right? And so, like, but that is also like the challenge we have modern day, though, right, with money and politics and people interfering. And so I do think when we're thinking about like community and how do we provide collective action, like how do we come together, it is like, yes, we're going to tell people like, you need to boycott, you need to do these things or whatever, but what is the actual cohesive like plan and strategy we have in place? Like, okay, I'm telling you that you need to do these things, so these places are bad, but how are we sharing the information with people, so like these are the alternatives? Or what does the community base look like so that we're supporting each other? Like, these are the lessons that we can draw as we navigate even what we're thinking about right now, right? We're in August, September of 2026. Over the past year and a half, we've had over 600,000 Black women out of the workforce, hundreds of thousands of Black men unemployed, underemployed, or just simply no longer actively in the workforce. And not because people don't want to work, right? Because we are in an era where this has become a challenge. And, not to age myself, but like, if you are over a certain age and you were an adult when the financial crash happened in 2008, 2009, it already took you about 10 years to rebound, right before we end up getting slammed with the pandemic, right? So we know we have to go back to rebuilding some of these strategies, and the frame of the American dream and stuff that maybe was sold to us through popular media and pop culture from, the dominant power structure, has never worked for anyone else except for that select elite white few, and maybe a few of their attaches of color, as they've decided to move along. So I really do think it is more getting grounded in that discipline, that practice and analysis, but then also like, what does it mean to people in their real world? And we're seeing some of that, happening now with folks running for office, with different, organizations and groups doing stuff. But like, how are we connecting with people directly about like their lived conditions and what are the opportunities, and then how do we show up? I think that's just a constant thing that we've been navigating for all 250 years, but I really do think, like, especially post pandemic, like post 2020, it has been a resurging like concern.
And just wrapping up here, I think one of the parts of your essay that really struck me was your sort of framing of Fannie Lou Hamer. I think that this was one of the first times that I actually saw her in her full softness and complexity in writing. A lot of times, especially when we're talking about the Voting Rights Act, which is coming up a lot in conversations today, her words, which are just so poignant and so relevant to this day, are often reshared. And I think that in as much as like it is relevant, I think sometimes it strips her away from, her dignity and her humanity by only exclusively talking about her through that exclusive lens of defiance, which again, I'm not taking away from that, but I think one of
It's
the things that I
powerful too, right?
appreciated,
It's absolutely powerful.
yeah, but what I appreciated about your piece was that you acknowledged that defiance within this also expression of love. And so I just wanted to know if you can like sort of unpack that more for us and just how you arrived at that, because I thought that was just so beautiful.
Two people, when you think about the civil rights era, right? Like two people that Malcolm X talks about, he had the utmost admiration that has been captured in different places, is Rosa Parks and Fannie Lou Hamer, right? These two women, both in the deep South, both doing the work they did, like caught. We think about Malcolm X and all the things that we think about him, like caught his admiration and attention, right? And so there's we always look at like the when she was speaking before the Rules Committee in '64 in Jersey, right, for the DNC, and just powerful and just interplay, like Fannie Lou Hamer is literally going up the entire Democratic establishment from Mississippi back. Literally, one of the people she's challenging is Senator Eastland, who was one of the senators from Mississippi, who literally was a landowner, right? That folks were sharecroppers on his land, right? like people were really putting it on the line, and we'll recount. She recounts, listen, when you listen to her testimony, she recounts being beaten, she recounts different things, and it's like, wow, she's so strong. But I was really thinking about it through the lens of like, because especially as I get older and just deal with my own chronic health, because we think so much about some of these amazing people in our, history, our predecessors. So many folks were so strong, they were so resilient. They endured a lot. They had health challenges or they died young, right? Younger than they probably should have. I mean, there was so much I was thinking about, and I was just like, we always talk about, oh, people are so strong. Or they always say, like, check on your strong friends, right? Like, that's what I was kind of thinking of, do that. And I'm like, but there is a speech that she gives when she's in Harlem in December of '64. Her and Malcolm X are speaking at this thing together, and part of it is a plea to folks to not one to help support, because they were still, by December '64 they're still fighting, because they're still fighting to try and prevent the all white racist Mississippi delegation from being seated in January. And so she's asking, one is a plea for support, for donations, etc. But she's also telling folks, like, don't look away and think that just because, like, you're not down there, that it's not you as well, right? But it's this plea that comes from, like, also, like, kind of like, hey, let big sis, like, auntie put you on game. Like, it's like kind of that love, right? Like, I've been,
Yeah.
like, it's rough everywhere, so don't turn a blind eye. But like, so that like clicked for me, like she had this broader, idea around like community and black folks and what needed to happen, and a lot of other folks at the time did, right? She's not the only one. But like, I really did appreciate, because of how she often is conveyed to us and kind of just put in this box in terms of just, Mississippi. I think also, like, because of who she was, right? She was not an educated woman. She was a sharecropper, right? She had to drop out of school to get in the fields with the rest of her family. I mean, she is someone, she didn't have pretty privilege, or she's not light skinned. She's not a lot of things that would have made her even seem more, sympathetic to certain people, right? Because of their, ascribing to Eurocentric standards of beauty and worth, right? She's a big black woman, who's very sturdy, in her build and strong. And so, like, I feel like some of the ways, unintentionally for many of us, that when we idolize and we romanticize kind of her, it does kind of strip her away of all this other stuff, because she's just this, like, solid soldier. And so I wanted to put her in a different light and just realize, like, yeah, she was defiant, she was doing this, but like that fierceness that's like when you think about moms lifting cars off their kids, right, to save their lives,
Yeah.
like where that comes from is that love, unconditional love and commitment, and not so much like where we always just think about like the strength and defiance. Again, strength and defiance, as someone who's defiant personally, awesome, amazing. But just like I think when we ground things in love, it helps to not just humanize, but it can also like personalize and soften, so we don't put people like way up here, and we
Yeah.
can also kind of see what we could do ourselves.
And I also think it's just that softness that I really appreciated as well, that, Black women are not always afforded. And so I appreciated you for, allowing her to exist in that as well, in addition to all the her other amazing contributions. But,
Yeah.
in the spirit of Hamer, I think one of the things your piece brought up for me personally was just, the communities in my life that am I'm privileged to be a part of, and just feel so blessed to be poured in by them. And so I just wanted to name a few of them, which is like my family, my church community, my New York family, and then also my village, right? The village team. And so just wanted to pass it to you to just sort of talk about, communities that you feel that you're a part of, that you feel pour into you, that you pour into, and the communities now that are just sort of sustaining you in this moment that feels really uncertain right now.
Appreciate that. I mean, I think there's definitely the network of family and extended family, adopted family, right? Like that's built over the years. I mean, I think about folks who I grew up with in both New York and Chicago. Not that many, but you're still able to keep in touch with people. But I really do think about like even institutions, right? Like community bookstores, like Black bookstores, and just that there's this feeling when you walk into a space and you're like, oh, this was created and cultivated for me. Um, in New York, there used to be Liberation Bookstore on around like 133rd Street, not far from the Schomburg, and Una Mozak was the founder, and to me, she was just Aunt Una. But like it was an amazing institution, and that's one of the places where my books came from when I was a kid. My dad worked there, so I would always get books from there. But like I think about places and people like that. I mean, even writing this, I thought about like the candy lady, when folks used to be able to go to the little community store. You go around there with your few little coins, or I guess it'll be dollars now, I don't know, but like just things like that. So there are these whole institutions, but there's entire networks of folks, like folks in radcoms and movement journalism networks, who have been amazing and dope. And there's a slew of Black progressive folks who have been throwing down the past 10 years trying to make their way. And growing into this space now at the village, I think has been really amazing. But like, I think, Southern movement organizers, journalists, and strategists who have kind of welcomed, again, I'm a transplant. I've been down here for 12 years, but the community that has built and really been receptive to putting down roots. When we bought our house, I told my kids, I was like, okay, we don't want to be gentrifiers. Because my daughter was like, are we technically gentrifiers? And I was like, we have intentions actually towards this community. And had my parents moved down here 40 years ago like they planned on it, we probably would have already been here. So it's just really interesting. I mean, and there's this whole younger set that's coming up, the Gen Z and some of the older Gen Alpha that are really trying to find their way. So I'm always looking forward to seeing and learning more from them, how they're understanding and embracing community and shifting how we show up and what we do.
Absolutely. Well, that seems like a really good place to end. Anoa, this conversation has just been so amazing, so illuminating. Thank you so much for your time. And just want to say to the audience, please check out Anoa's essay. Again, the title of that is Love and Self-Determination, Building and Sustaining Black Community Power at 250. You can check this essay out at thevillagemedia.com/BLK 250, and make sure to drop down in the comments, shout out your community, shout out the folks that are getting you through this moment, and be sure to be a part of our community, the village. Subscribe here to YouTube, and also follow us on Instagram and all the socials. We're everywhere. But again, Anoa, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Bye.